Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Zaylene Carroll. I am with One Click LCA, and I'm joined today by Spencer Jarrett, also with One Click LCA. He is an LCA and EPD expert. And we are very lucky to be joined today also by Webley Bowles and Amy Lewis of the New Buildings Institute. So they are both experts on the new CALGreen embodied carbon requirements. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we will get into that. We'll get into what you need to know about the new requirements that will be going into effect next year and how you can be ready for compliance. Before we get started, though, we've got a lot of people joining us today, and we'd love to see where you are joining from. So if you can jump into the chat, let us know where you're from, if you're from California or if you're from outside California. And if you also wouldn't mind giving us a little information about what your role is, what you're hoping to learn today, then we can take that information and make sure that we are answering all the questions and providing you all of the information that you need. While we wait for some folks to join in the chat and let us know where they are coming from, I want to give you a little bit of an idea of what to expect for today's webinar. So we will begin with some presentations. Spencer, Webley, and Amy will all present, give you some information about One Click LCA, about CalGreen, about how you can comply. And then we will have time at the end for a live question and answer session. So if you have a question during the presentation, if you have a question right now, we want to know what those questions are, and we will answer them live. So go ahead, you can put those questions in the questions tab, or you can put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring both sides, and I'll be gathering up the questions for the live Q&A at the end. So definitely let us know what you're wondering. And we've got folks coming from a lot of different places. So we do have some folks joining from different regions in California. We've also got Oregon, Washington, D.C., Seattle, so Maine. So we've got folks from all over the country. Welcome. It's great to have you here. And without further ado, Spencer, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Aileen. So before I hand it over to Webley and Amy to get into the specifics of the code requirement and how you can comply, I just want to tell you a little bit about One-Click LCA and how we can help you comply with the upcoming CalGreen requirements. So a little bit about One-Click LCA as a whole before I jump into some of our tools. We are a global company, and we make software tools for architects, engineers, designers, developers, institutions to calculate and report their embodied carbon impact. So this just kind of gives you an idea of some of the folks that already work with us from each sector of the construction industry. Our focus is specifically on construction, just due to the overall impact it has on global emissions. And how do we help all of these people? Well, we have specific tools for each phase of the design and construction cycle for projects. So I'll go into a little bit more of the specifics for some of these tools in just a couple of slides. But we have tools all the way from the most early stages of design, where you can actually create a conceptual carbon model to kind of identify hotspots early on, all the way through completion to actually document the as-built construction and calculate the embodied carbon footprint at that point as well. So we do this by creating tools that help you first measure your impact and then actually see what that is. And then we have tools in place that allow you to compare different materials, different design options, different manufacturers, different plants to find reductions for each project. So to get a little bit more specific with some of the tools that we offer, the first one being Carbon Designer 3D. So this is our conceptual modeling tool. Basically, in just a couple of minutes, you can come up with sort of a shoebox building model based on the square footage the number of floors and the overall dimensions of your proposed project. And from there, you can change out materials and different construction types based on US industry average EPDs to kind of compare design options very early on before you ever have to actually draw or model anything or invest too much time into the design of the project. One of the most common ways that people come up with a baseline LCA using one-click LCA is just using a simple, common Excel-based material takeoff or bill of materials. So in short, we need to know the classification of the materials you intend to use, the material name, ideally as specific as possible, and then the quantity of those materials. If you have that in a spreadsheet, you can upload that directly into one-click LCA, and it will automatically map those materials to EPDs. And then from there, you can refine sort of the selection of EPDs to match what you actually intend to use on the project. So our software does integrate with pretty much all of the BIM tools that are out there. The most popular here in the US being Revit, which is what most designers use. So we do have a two-way integration with Revit. This allows you to actually send your model geometry from Revit to one-click LCA. So it's essentially taking that material takeoff list from your model and importing it into one-click LCA, which is in that top screenshot there. The other option is to stay within Revit, and you can actually search our EPD database, which in North America, we have roughly 50,000 different EPDs that you can search for and use in your LCA designs. You can actually search that entire database within Revit using the one-click LCA plugin and individually map each material to the EPD that you intend to use. And you really have control over the level of detail that you'd like to have within your LCA. So there in the screenshot on the top right, it's showing kind of the options that you have as far as choosing your default LCA parameters. These are things like the typical service life of materials, the end of life calculation scenario, where the project is localized to. You can set blanket parameters. So if you don't change the parameters for every single material, it will default to whatever you want it to default to. So in practice, the way that our tools are usually used are to identify, first off, what the most impactful materials are. So as soon as you come up with a baseline LCA, whether it be from an Excel bill of materials or a Revit BIM model, and you input that into one-click LCA, we can quickly tell you what are the most impactful materials. From there, you can compare different sustainable alternatives. You can do this by comparing different plants from the same manufacturer if they have EPDs, different materials from differing manufacturers if they have EPDs. And this is a really practical way that allows you to make better decisions on where to source materials from and what materials to use in the first place. And we do have a variety of automated reporting options available. So once you are done with the LCA, all of the materials, the EPDs, the quantities have been validated, and you found the reductions, as much reduction as you can in the proposed LCA. We have automated reports such as these Word reports, which basically takes your LCA results and puts it into kind of a formal Word document report that you can share with any of your project stakeholders, and autofills that with your results and some of the relevant reporting graphs that actually graphically show your results. Some other options that we have are you can download the entire LCA result report as an Excel file and then upload it into Power BI or Tableau if you want to have it on a separate dashboard. And in terms of actually documenting the EPDs that you are using, rather than having to actually go and download each EPD from our database or from different program operators, you can, in one click, actually put all the EPDs into one zipped file, and all your documentation is in one place. So that's just a bit about how we can actually help you comply with the upcoming CALGreen requirements. At this point, I'm going to pass it off to Webley, and she will kick it off in some more detail for those requirements.
Great. Thanks, Spencer. And thanks, Aileen, for hosting this webinar today. Really excited about this. Amy and I have been involved in the development of the embodied carbon requirements for over a year, along with many, many other people. So we're really excited about it. I do have to have a short disclaimer to say that what we're going to present today is what has been presented in code, and also the state might come out with additional documentation that varies from what we interpret the requirements to be. And so I just want to give that caveat. I'll talk a little bit more about how when they plan to publish that. So today we will do a quick embodied carbon summary. I think probably all y'all know this, so it'll be pretty fast. We'll talk about the growing number of policies around embodied carbon. We will discuss the 3 embodied carbon components, and then Amy will dig us way deep into the details, and we'll have some Q&A. So if you're not familiar with New Buildings Institute, we push for better buildings that achieve net zero, net carbon, and go beyond that, including looking at life cycles. And we follow these 5 foundations for looking at carbon neutral buildings. And California has been a long leader in this, and they have adopted many of these policies and foundations. So I'm sure that you've seen these around before. I think everyone was probably familiar that buildings are responsible for 39% of global CO2 emissions, and about 1/3 of those actually come from the production of building products. So operational carbon occurs year over year as the building consumes energy, and it's often flexible because we can reduce that. We can get low carbon energy through renewables and other such things, whereas embodied carbon is pretty much fixed when the products are installed in the building. And we can have a separate conversation about carbon storing materials later. The AIA Large Firm Roundtable put together this list of materials here to kind of show what the biggest contributions of embodied carbon are. So generally, concrete and steel make up the largest percentage of a building's upfront embodied carbon. So these numbers kind of roughly identify the cradle to gate. So it's not looking at the whole life embodied carbon of interiors, envelope, and structure. And when we start to look at operations, the structure, the envelope are replaced less frequently than the interiors. So while the interiors pie is small, we know that as the building is renovated over the years, that can actually grow when we look at the full life cycle. So MBI has been looking at a lot of different policies around embodied carbon for a number of years, and we need all of these different policies to really make the change that we need to make on climate change. And for embodied carbon, there's several opportunities within existing gateways that we can look at. Governments can impact their own buildings. That's what's on the far left. They can also impact public building policy through requirements, incentives, looking at cap and trade, and even financial opportunities like PACE. The national and local building codes can impact buildings' embodied carbon through building or zoning codes, and even design standards really impact the materials that we use within our buildings. Utilities that regulate GHG emissions and not just energy, kWh, and therms, they can also provide incentives for low embodied carbon activities as well. And AIA, ASHRAE, university certification bodies can require curriculum and education on understanding the life cycle emissions. And that's pretty similar to what California's AB 100 has done, where it requires architects to get net zero carbon continuing education. So there's a lot of opportunities that we can impact, that we can look at. Carbon Leadership Forum keeps a map of all those different embodied carbon policies. It is a fast-growing map. There's a lot of activity that's happening out there, especially at the federal government. There is a link here, carbonleadershipforum.org, CLF-policy-toolkit. It's pretty easy to Google to get there. On that website, there's a bunch of policies on that map. You can kind of roll over and see the different policies there. I want to walk through just a couple of them to give you kind of a sample of what's out there. Hopefully you're familiar with Buy Clean, those that are in California. No, we have people from all over. But Buy Clean California sets GWP limits for specific building products, and it's only required for state projects. So when the state purchases those specific products, that's when it comes into play. Portland has a low carbon concrete initiative, which is similar, where it sets GWP limits, but in this case, it's only concrete. New Jersey has a Buy Clean requirement. That's great because there's actually two incentive options there. One is a tax credit for cement or concrete plants that meet specific global warming potential limits. And the second is a bid discount for state projects for those that concrete that meets it. Austin's Green Building Program indicates which rating system credits project teams need to achieve on specific projects. And a lot of those, or some of those, will point to the embodied carbon requirements. CALGreen, which we'll talk about very quickly today, or very intensely today, but quickly here. There's 3 different options, but it is required for projects that are over 100,000 square feet. And then ASHRAE 189.1 also, which turns into the International Green Construction Code, is asking for EPDs and setting global warming potential limits. That limit is set at 125% of the industry-wide average. They don't specify the specific products, but they leave it up to design teams. And in that process, they incentivize achieving the requirement with the highest cost of products. So if it is a higher cost product, concrete, steel, primary structure, that's going to be encouraged. Can't not mention what the federal government is doing when we talk about policies. The U.S. government is the largest purchaser of goods and services, and there are several federal activities that are really impacting and moving the needle on lower embodied carbon materials. There's the Federal Buy Clean Initiative, which is a group of federal agencies that are setting global warming potential limits for concrete, asphalt, glass, steel. And the GSA is the US's largest landlord, and setting these requirements is a really big deal to impact a lot of square footage. So most of these that you see on the screen are related to the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. And this has been the largest climate funding that the US has ever passed. And even if we implement this 100%, it will only get us 50 to 75% of the way there that we need to meet our climate goals. And so there is a responsibility that we have as designers, as practitioners working in the building sector, to push that further, even when it's not required, to take some of the best practices from other projects and apply it to our own. And the government is supporting that. So the EPA has been tasked with creating a low carbon labeling program for construction products. They're issuing billions of dollars in grants and technical assistance to develop EPDs. GSA it has over $2 billion to install lower GWP products. Same with Department of Transportation's Highway Administration, which plans to do that mainly through incentives. HUD and FEMA also have a ton of funding to support resilient buildings and low embodied carbon materials. So all of these dates are incredibly soon. So there is going to be quick action happening on this. And that CLF website that I pointed to previously has a lot of information to stay up to date on what's happening at various levels. But today we're here to talk about what's happening with the embodied carbon requirements within CALGreen. So the new CALGreen measures come into effect July 1st, 2024, so next year. The final language will be published next month. It goes through a certain process, and you can find it on the website, on the, what is the name of the website?
The Building Standards Commission.
Thank you. You can find it on the Building Standards Commission website on their 15-day language. It's a little bit messy. If you're familiar with code language, you can understand what is code language and what is part of an explanatory process. But that will be published very soon. So if you can just hold on for a couple more weeks, we're anticipating that that new language will be published in a very clean version. The threshold for compliance is projects that are over 100,000 square feet for commercial, and then schools that are 50,000 square feet and larger will need to comply with the requirements. We set the size, or we kind of studied this and recommended this size based on the number of buildings that it would impact. So buildings that are 50,000 square feet and larger account for about 6% of commercial buildings, but they're about 50% of commercial floor space. And 100,000 square foot buildings are about 2% of projects, but 40% of the square footage. So those are some of the reasoning behind that. I know that there's been a couple questions about that. So I'll walk us through kind of high level what the code requirements look like. So this process was primarily moving 2 voluntary measures into the mandatory section, and it requires a team to choose one of 3 different compliance paths. So the first is building LCA, which is showing a 10% reduction from the baseline. That was voluntary previously, and it's moving into mandatory, or mandatory option, I should say. And then prescriptive, that is aligning with the CALGreen requirements, and it's also including concrete. And then the reuse is the last option, which can only be cannot be used on a new construction building unless there is a substantial amount of reuse, and that's 45% of the structure and enclosure. So this measure can be adopted by local jurisdictions and adopted without adopting all of the tiers of CALGreen. They can just adopt this one. And we're seeing really increased interest in adopting CALGreen as an ordinance in larger cities. So stay tuned for more about that in 2024. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Amy to walk through each of these paths and to provide a little bit more insight into what code officials specifically will be looking for. Amy, take it away.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Webley, and thank you to the audience for being here. We're excited to be sharing this with you today. Webley, did you just on this slide touch on the levels on the mandatory and the 2 voluntary tiers?
I think it'd be great for you to do that.
Okay, great. All right, so I will mention it again in the coming slides, but just as an overview, we'll mainly be talking about the mandatory requirements. So for life cycle assessment, 10% reduction from a baseline. For prescriptive compliance path, you can see this as a percentage relative to industry averages, and similarly for building reuse, and then graduating to higher percentages for tier 1 and tier 2, which again, I'll mention them again, but you can see it at a glance here. So a life cycle analysis can be thought of like an energy model, but for determining the carbon related to the manufacturing of building materials. It's anticipated that the LCA will be the most popular compliance path for projects over 100,000 square feet. To demonstrate compliance for CALGreen, a summary of the GWP analysis by the software and worksheet WS4, which is not the one in this picture, signed by the design professional of record, shall be provided in the construction documents. This worksheet is an additional optional worksheet that intended to support designers, and jurisdictions can also require it. A copy of the whole building LCA, which includes the GWP analysis produced by the software, in addition to other maintenance and training information, needs to be included in the operations and maintenance manual and should be provided to the owner at the close of construction. So think of this as something to wrap into other operation and maintenance manual information for the project owner. The enforcing agency may require inspection and inspection reports in accordance with certain code sections. There are some code numbers in my part of the presentation. I might not read all of them, but in this case, sections 702.2 and 703.1. during and at completion of construction to demonstrate substantial conformance. Inspection should be performed by the design professional of record or a third party acceptable to the enforcing agency. And depending on the jurisdiction, they will specify who needs to be doing the verification. For the LCA, it needs to be cradle to grave according to ISO 1400-44. Operational energy is excluded, but of course needs to be kept in mind for compliance with the energy code. We don't want trade-offs that harm compliance on either side. The reference baseline must be made up of the same type of materials, a building with the same type of materials, size, function, complexity, and location. The mandatory requirements, the mandatory measure requires a 10% reduction below the baseline. For voluntary tiers that jurisdictions can adopt, Tier 1 would be a 15% reduction, and Tier 2 is a 20% reduction. It's important to note that the code measure does list the software requirements for the LCA reporting in order to level the playing field and have consistency and good quality standards in reporting. It must have a data set compliant with ISO 1400-44 and ISO 21930-2017 or EN 15804, and the software shall conform per the section also referenced with the measure. This is a design-based credit and requires the design team to set up their contractor to install as intended. In the way that CALGreen doesn't require the energy model to match exactly the operational energy of the building once it's occupied, the same is true for embodied carbon, but there are several existing processes that set the construction process up for success. For specifications, include reporting requirements in Division 1, including the EPDs for key products like concrete, steel, insulation, glass, and so on. Insert the LCA worksheet in the plan set. In RFPs, highlight the embodied carbon reporting needs. In bid meetings, stress the importance of meeting the embodied carbon requirements. Inquire about how contractors that you are considering working with, how they have met requirements on similar projects or how they plan to on your project. Projects of this size will have more construction administration than smaller jobs, which is an advantage for confirming compliance here. Submittal requirements are essential verification points to confirm that the products included meet the GWP requirements as specified. And if products are changed, consider updating the LCA and providing that information to the owner. For the building reuse compliance path, the elements to include for reuse include primary structural elements, enclosure, roof and wall framing, insulation, and exterior finishes. It excludes windows, portions that are structurally unsound or hazardous, and hazardous materials that are being remediated. And there is an exception for additions that are more than 2 times the area of the existing building. Those portions will be considered new construction. When calculating the reused area, there's a workbook to indicate the amount of reuse of the structure and enclosure. Similar to the whole building LCA, building reuse is of course a design-related measure, so the same process should be followed to incorporate the requirements into the contract documents, meetings, and other communications. The prescriptive compliance path aligns with Buy Clean California, the government's procurement policy with the important addition of concrete. This approach requires that specific products are at or below specified global warming potential limits. These limits are set to begin with at an achievable level above industry average. Jump too soon. To comply with the requirements, the project teams must collect and report Type 3 environmental product declarations, either product-specific or factory-specific. Concrete is a unique product. Each mix of concrete doesn't have to meet each GWP limit, but the contractor can apply a weighted average approach on average of all the mixes used in the job, and the weighted average must meet the GWP limit. And this process is what's used in the Marin County Low Concrete Code. The design professional will need to sign the worksheet confirming compliance. Since this is a construction-related measure, the architect will need to work closely with the construction team to confirm compliance. Similar to the other measures, setting up the process in design will help ensure proper installation of low-embodied concrete products. We've covered a lot of information, and I'd like to help you look ahead to what your local building departments will be looking for to verify compliance. The documentation we've discussed should be verified and reviewed in plan review and field inspection. Include the CALGreen worksheets in your plan sets. The whole building LCA reporting is required to be produced with a qualifying software, as mentioned earlier. And remember that although in the plan sets for the mandatory measure, it's required just to include the summary analysis and the signature worksheet, the enforcing agency may require reports. And that parallels other areas of CALGreen where you need to be prepared to show additional documentation. So be prepared to furnish the report. And for compliance with these measures, it's best to hit it hard early in the process, pay attention early in design in order to have as much supporting documentation in plan review and in field inspection. As with other scopes in building plan check and inspection, the field inspector or special inspector will verify that conditions on site are consistent with documentation. A progress field inspection at the time of rough framing is best practice, although it might not be carried out by all jurisdictions on the same time frame, but it's good to expect it. And your inspector may check for any of these things. At least this would be best practice to perform any of these elements of gathering supporting information in order to support the reporting that's included in the plan set. And I'm going to wrap up my section with these pieces of advice, some pointers for how to set up for success in compliance and where to hit hard in design and in documentation for the best outcome. Start early and communicate across roles, including you can consider inviting concrete vendors to early design discussions even before bid. They might really welcome the opportunity to give input on what mixes are possible for your applications. You can include embodied carbon requirements in your interview for structural engineer. And I heard a comment recently that I thought was encouraging here from an architect experienced in low carbon projects. He said, when you're interviewing a structural engineer, maybe they haven't had to meet these specific requirements before. The answer doesn't have to be we have the best mix, but the answer has to indicate a willingness to collaborate. Construction administration, again, is more likely on projects of the scale that need to comply when this measure first rolls out, which makes it easier to monitor during construction. So that's just an area to pay attention to for strong compliance with the embodied carbon measures. And as mentioned, front load as much as possible with careful design, with careful documentation in the design phase, and that will help later on in field inspections and for demonstrating compliance. And even if it's this to some extent is uncharted territory, even though, you know, we've had the concept of measuring embodied carbon for some time, but of course this measure is brand new. So it is uncharted territory. If you're a practitioner or whatever your role is related to these requirements, but especially for designers and practitioners in design and construction, try your best, ask questions, share notes, communicate with each other, because you know, even though it in the not so distant past, it felt like the Wild West. We're getting clarity around it with tools like One-Click LCA and other reporting tools, and we'll bring the market along with us. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it back to Webley to share some resources.
Thanks, Amy. You make a really good point. You know, a lot of this stuff is pretty new, and even with the resources that exist, there might not be all the information that we want. And so doing our best is kind of where we always are when it comes to practice. So even resources like this webinar that One-Click LCA is putting on is really fantastic to help share more information. And because the California Building Standards Commission has not yet published that code, there's many people that are using summaries like this presentation to kind of support that. So as I mentioned before, I think Aileen put that in the chat, the link to the 15-day language in the chat, but you can find that link on the California Building Standards Commission website. Under the 15-day code language, I think you have to click on green CAC and then the 15-day code language, and it's still not exactly what you want. So again, stay tuned. And there are a couple of resources that have been published. So the resource on the left was published in October by the California IOUs. It does include the requirements that were presented within this presentation. And this is the soapbox I stand on every time I talk about embodied carbon. While refrigerants are not required within CALGreen, it's always really important that we consider some of the highest carbon products that are in our buildings, including refrigerants. So I always have to make a plug to talk about refrigerants, and California has some really great policies around managing refrigerants and creating secondary markets. MBI also has a bunch of resources. If you want to nerd out and talk about embodied carbon in the code, you can go to our embodied carbon landing page on our website and read more about that. You can also get in touch with, I was going to say both of us nerds, but Amy is not as much of a nerd as I am, but you can still reach out to both of us, and we're happy to help answer any questions. We are passing along questions that we are collecting as we've been talking about this for the last year, and supporting the state in developing an official FAQ, and I can't tell you the timeline as to when that will be published.
Thank you both so much for that presentation. A lot of really great information there. We have a slide here just about One-Click LCA's Academy. So this is not specifically for CALGreen, but if you want to learn more about LCA or EPD, or we have just a whole host of training resources there, you can check that out. We are going to head to our live Q&A. So we've got a lot of questions that came in through the chat and the questions tab, and we'll get to all those. But really quick, before we start the Q&A, we want to ask a question of you, our live audience. I will publish a poll here in just a moment, and to see if you want if you would like to schedule a free consultation to learn more about complying with the new CALGreen requirements. So if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to schedule a consultation with us, just click yes on the poll that you see on your screen, and we will get in touch with you and give you that additional help that you need. So now that we've got our question to you, we're ready to answer your questions to us. So I've been collecting the questions as they've been coming in, and let me go ahead and ask the first question. I'll hand this to you, Webley. I know maybe the answer is not as it's not as clear of an answer, but will the new federal EC labeling program incorporate with the EPD system or likely replace it?
We don't know yet. It has not been published. So Congress directed EPA to develop this. They have been, my understanding, they've been developing it for about a year, maybe a little bit less, and it will be published probably for comment earlier next year. So sorry, I don't know all the details. We'll all find out together soon.
That's still good, though. Good to know sort of where to be looking and when to be looking for that answer. Another question that we got was about what constitutes a school. Is it K through 12 only? Is higher education included?
Yeah, so because the Division of the State Architect was involved in this, they have jurisdiction, that might not be the exact word, over schools, and schools in their world is considered any sort of public K through 12 in California, community colleges, and then this kind of vague state-owned and leased essential service buildings. And I don't know if that always relates to schools, so I will leave that up to someone else's interpretation on your unique project.
Sure. So I guess, if you fall into that sort of gray area, then maybe dig a little deeper. Otherwise, a school is sort of what you expect as a school, both K through 12 and higher ed.
Just community colleges, maybe not
community
not
college.
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry about that. The next question we have is about materials. So this person just wants to make sure that they're understanding correctly. The LCA/EPDs are only required for major materials like concrete, glass, and steel. What about other construction materials, electrical equipment, fittings, etc.? Will EPDs be required or recommended for those? How do you see that changing in the future?
Aileen, are you able to go back through the slides, or can I do that?
Yes,
I think it'd be
let me
helpful
enlarge them for you. Sure.
Let's go back to a specific slide here. So when we look at the three different paths, and specifically the LCA and the prescriptive path, the prescriptive path is specifically structural steel. So that's all your structural steel shapes, various shapes, rebar, flat glass. So not necessarily glazing, but flat glass independently because of the way that the product categories rules are written. Light and heavy duty mineral wool insulation. So only that type of insulation, and ready mix concrete. So excluded from here are any of your insulations that are not mineral wool insulation, as well as any precast concrete, any sort of light frame structure, light frame steel decking. That's all is all excluded. So these products are specifically mentioned because there are product category rules which govern the industry-wide EPD for those products. So those are very prescriptive for the prescriptive path. For the life cycle analysis, it is just limited to the components that you see there on the screen. So the primary and secondary structural members, which are defined by code, glazing, insulation, exterior finishes. And those are variable into like what that means for each individual project, because exterior finishes can mean a variety of products. So for the LCA, that's what's included, and then the prescriptive path is just a very specific set of materials.
Thank you for that clarification. And I want to ask our audience real quick if you can hear me. I saw a message in the chat that someone couldn't hear the questions being asked. So when I ask you a question, if you want to sort of just repeat it real quick, just in case I'm having a trouble with my microphone. But the next question, Amy, I'm going to pass this one to you, which is, can you share the LCA compliance software programs that projects are allowed to use?
Yes. Some of these have been specifically identified in the development of the code measure. Not sure, since we don't have the final published language, if they'll be also listed when it is published. And there might be more, but some include free softwares, include the Athena Sustainable Materials Institute tool and One-Click LCA Planetary. And paid versions include, but are not limited to, Sphera Gabi solutions. And I can put the links in the chat. Sima Pro and One-Click LCA and Tally for Revit.
Great, that's excellent. Yeah, and we'll put those links in the chat so that you can see those. This question is about PCR. So the California website currently calls out concrete and insulation EPD generation in accordance with specific proprietary PCRs and program operators. Will the new requirements allow other PCR program operators to compete?
The code language does not specifically note the baseline of the PCR, which I think is something that will need to likely be clarified as it moves forward. And I think I saw a question in the chat about how were the baselines developed specifically for the prescriptive path. They were developed based on North American industry-wide EPDs, which are based upon North American PCRs in most cases. We'll get into those details later. But essentially, there's a good question out there about if I bring in imported steel that may meet the requirements but does not have the same baseline, does it actually meet the requirements? And the way I read it is that it would, because that has not specifically been spelled out.
Okay, excellent. And more clarification surely will, like so many things with this, we'll see a little bit more clarification in the future. This next question is about the reuse path. And just a clarification, is it 45% of the structure and 45% of the enclosure, or 45% of the total?
My understanding is it's 45% of the total. So it's broken out so that those, what to include or exclude for each, but it's 45% total overall.
And then another question is, can you speak to the baseline for the life cycle analysis a bit more? What type of elements can you claim savings on, structural sizing, materials, etc.?
Amy, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yes, I would start and then maybe pass it over. And I don't know if there's something specific to One-Click LCA that could also be added here. But yeah, the language of the requirement does define how the baseline is set. So as I mentioned, setting up a baseline building that needs to be substantially similar, same material types, same function and level of complexity and location. And not sure if that answers the question entirely.
I think one thing I'll add there is that since it is looking, the scope of the study is based on a specific set of products, we want to look for efficiencies in those products that are being used, as well as you can you can achieve avoided saving. You can avoid emissions by using products with lower global warming potential.
Spencer, did you have anything to add about One-Click LCA capabilities there?
Yeah, as far as One-Click LCA software capabilities, basically, I think the most common way that people are going to come up with the baseline is either from a BIM model or from a Excel-based bill of materials. Once you import that into one-click LCA, what you would do is basically validate each material is matched to the correct data point that's actually reporting what the embodied carbon impact is, whether it be an EPD or generic data point. And from there, you can actually copy that LCA model and then basically have a clean slate of that copied model to compare different material options, different manufacturers, different plants, depending on where you're at in the project. If you can change some of the design and maybe reduce the materials you're using, I would say that should be the first option.
Great. This next question is a little less of a technical question, sort of where do you see this going? And it's from a landscape architect. And they ask, do you envision all design disciplines participating in CALGreen's new 10% embodied carbon reductions, or do you see this requirement skewed more towards architecture and structural engineers?
I definitely see it skewed towards those that are required to comply, which is why it's in code. I would absolutely encourage anyone that is not required. So if you're working on a 25,000 square foot project, why not try this? If you are a plumbing engineer, why don't you try to limit the amount of pipe that's in your building, the amount of pipe being used in the building? If you're a landscape architect, how can you try to support the building and reducing sequestering more carbon? So I think I don't know that I envision all disciplines doing it. I think in my most optimistic state, yes, but it's only required for building projects.
And that, that makes sense. But if you are a landscape architect or anyone in one of these other disciplines, of course we always encourage and hope that you will that everyone will do a little bit more than what the code is asking for. Just a few more questions left. One question is, how do the CALGreen requirements align with LEED building LCA?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I have not done LEED LCA, so there might be some details that are missing. I'll say the main things that align is that they are both looking at cradle to grave, and they both exclude operational energy. And they both have a % reduction from a user-defined baseline. So those are similar things. LEED does allow that certain life cycle modules just can be excluded, where CALGreen requires that they're all included except for that operational. And both programs require essentially the same components being included, so structure and envelope essentially. The main difference is where the environmental impact categories come into play. So CALGreen is focused 100% on the global warming potential impact category, whereas LEED requires that for certain credits, and this is where like my LEED knowledge is a little bit fuzzy. They require a range of reductions in 3 different environmental impact categories out of the 7 different ones. So that's the main difference, is that CALGreen is focusing primarily on GWP, global warming potential.
Excellent. And then Amy, I think this question will be good for you, which is, who is going to be verifying the LCA that someone does for that path? And then how long will that process likely take?
So to some extent, the party that's required to verify is going to be set by the jurisdiction. So within the statewide requirement, right, this is verified by the design professional, and it can also include a third-party verification or a special inspector, but that is to be determined at the jurisdictional level. So you will find out in your instructions during the building permit process who needs to sign and verify. And if it's a third party that needs to be retained by the design or permit applicant on the permit applicant side. And in terms of the time frame, it should track to the regular plan review and permitting process. It shouldn't add extra time significantly to review and receiving final occupancy permit.
Great. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank Webley and Amy, both of you, for your time today and answering our audience questions. A lot of really great questions. Thank you to our live audience. This was great, really fascinating conversation, a lot of really great engagement. So, feel free, if you want to keep the conversation going, to reach out to Amy or Webley or Spencer. We're all on LinkedIn, and you can find us there and keep the conversation going. Amy and Webley, do you have any sort of last things you'd like to say before we end off today?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you for continuing in the spirit of education to make sure that more people know about this really exciting code pathway that's being developed in more and more jurisdictions, not just in California, but all across the U.S. are interested in it. So we're going to need to have to do another one of these soon.
Absolutely. Well, we will look forward to doing this again with you. And thanks again to our audience, and we will see you guys next time.